the next 2 days, Professor Gelmet left them in doubt. There was no repeat of the surprise appearance in the foodarium. The children wondered whether he was going to punish Bartholomew Jenkins, or at least investigate his role in the Carlson Marx affair, or whether Dr. Fugg had even told him about Davina's allegation. Bartholomew Jenkins grew smugger, and everyone began to suspect that he was going to get away with what he had done. Some of the kids, you could see, were beginning to admire him openly. Benedict Goldberg and Morris Tuttelheim made no secret of their approval. On Sunday morning, the professor appeared to give his weekly talk. He still gave no sign that he was going to say anything about the Carlson Marx affair. As always, he talked about leadership. This week, it was leadership and the need to be courageous, but not too courageous. Leadership and the need to be eager for action, but not too eager. Leadership, in short, and the need for moderation. At the end, as they always had to do before the professor left, everyone shouted the academy motto, "Excellence knows no delay! Leadership knows no obstacle!" And only then, when the children thought he was about to leave, did the professor say, "There's one more thing, leaders." Suddenly, there was a heavy, thick silence in the room. Everyone stole a glance at Bartholomew Jenkins, who stared straight ahead. The professor's face had assumed a deep, thoughtful, almost injured expression. "Leaders, I have to refer to a certain matter which I had hoped was closed." The professor paused, as if having to summon up all his will just to talk about something so painful. "Dr. Fugg has informed me that there is a view that a certain boy, I won't utter his name, but he has been expelled from this academy for behaving in a way entirely unbecoming a leader and committing a crime of the utmost seriousness. Well, Dr. Fugg has informed me that there is a view that this boy was persuaded to commit his crime by one of the leaders sitting in this room. In this very room! Put up to it, to use a common term. In fact, the name of this leader, who is alleged to have put up the boy to the crime, has been supplied to me. Isn't that right, Dr. Fugg?" The professor glanced at the back of the room, where Dr. Fugg was standing. Dr. Fugg nodded. The professor turned his pale, serious gaze back on the children. He took a deep breath. "This allegation has come as a grave shock to me, a very grave shock. I had no idea that such a thing might have taken place. Believe me when I say that nothing could have surprised me more. Leaders, I have given it great consideration. I have asked myself, if it turned out to be true, what I should do. I have thought deeply about it, and I have decided..." The children waited for the professor to tell them what he had decided, hardly daring to breathe. "I have decided that, even if it is true, what difference does it make?" The professor looked at them questioningly. "If a leader did suggest this action to the boy, if he did put him up to it, perhaps the leader was joking, and perhaps the boy mistook it for a serious proposal. Who am I to say? Or perhaps it really was a serious suggestion. So what? When I told you about the penalty of expulsion, I told you that it was for tampering with the helmets. For tampering with them, leaders, not for suggesting it. For doing it, not for talking about it. Every one of you must exercise your own judgment. A leader takes responsibility for his or her actions. If someone suggests that you do something, it's up to you to decide whether you actually do it. So the matter is closed. Even if one of the leaders sitting in this room did suggest the crime to the boy, as has been alleged, it was up to the boy to know better, and he did not. He is the one who bears responsibility. Consequently, he is the one to be punished." Bartholomew Jenkins smiled, as if he had known all along that this is what the professor would say. Others glared at him and shook their heads in disbelief. "Ermegild Zegna, what is it?" said the professor sharply. Ermegild stood up. "I think I speak for all of us, Professor, when I..." "Not all of us," hissed Benedict Goldberg. "What is it, Ermegild?" said the professor. "Well, anyone who suggested something like that to Carlson Marx should have known better. He should have known that Carlson was the kind of boy who'd believe anything he was told." "True," said the professor. "That person who suggested it may well have known." "What of it?" Ermegild frowned. "Oh," she said. "Isn't that wrong then, Professor Gelmet?" demanded Davina suddenly, jumping up. She glared at Bartholomew. If he knew, doesn't that mean he just used Carlson? Davina Macready, said the professor, did you listen to anything I said this morning during my talk? Yes, said Davina. I talked about moderation, didn't I? Yes. Then sit down, Davina Macready. Davina stayed on her feet for a moment longer, then sat down. The professor turned his glance on Ermengild, and she sat down as well. Professor Gelmet closed his eyes, as if thinking deeply. Leaders, he said at last, when you first came here, I said to you that leadership is not only about knowledge. Knowing things is only one part of it. I said there were other important aspects to leadership as well. I said you would learn these also in your time at the academy. Do you remember this? The children nodded. I said that when I talked to you on Sundays, I would talk to you about these things. Do you remember? The children nodded again. Suddenly, the professor's voice went very low. Understand this. Everything around you is part of your education in leadership. Everything someone does, everything someone says, the way you respond to each thing, the decisions you make, the decisions you don't make. Look around you, leaders. Look around you. The children looked uncertainly at each other. Is it he or she or he who's going to say the thing that tempts you? Who will do the thing that destroys you? Does he even know that he is doing it? Charlotte Reedy? Is it Edmund Zucker sitting there beside you? Ernst van Geet? Is it Murag Himmelfarb? What will they do? How will it happen? When? Who can you trust, leaders? Who can you trust? Myself! Cried Bartholomew Jenkins, jumping to his feet. That's one answer, said the professor quietly. Sit down, Bartholomew. Bartholomew sat. Take nothing for granted, said Professor Gelmet. Make no assumptions. In life, everything is a test. Everything here is a test as well. Or it might be. You never know when it is or when it isn't. So be careful, leaders. That's my advice. Be careful. The professor nodded meaningfully. Careful, he whispered, and he continued whispering it softer and softer as he left the room. Careful, careful, careful. That night, after lights out, Davina tapped at Will's door. Are you asleep? She whispered, stepping quickly inside. No, said Will. No, said Stanley. I was, said Bennett. Davina closed the door behind her. I couldn't wait, she said, sitting on the edge of Will's bed. I couldn't sleep. As soon as I thought of it, I had to come. Thought of what? Asked Will. Professor Gelmet asked us today who we could trust. So? I've been thinking about it, said Davina. Who can we trust? She looked in turn at Stanley and Will. In the moonlight coming through the window, she could see each of them sitting up, intently returning her gaze. Bart Simpson said he could only trust himself, but we can trust each other, can't we? Of course we can, said Will. Then let's swear it, whispered Davina urgently. Davina, said Will, this could have waited until morning. You didn't need to take the risk of... No, Will, you can't wait. Let's do it now. Let's swear that whatever happens, whatever anyone says or does, we three can always trust each other. Davina clenched her fist and thrust out her arm. Will and Stanley glanced at one another. All right, said Will. He leaned forward and thrust out his clenched fist until it was touching Davina's. Stanley got up and held out his fist as well. Hello, said a voice from the shoe drawer. Bennett's right, whispered Stanley. He's a road dog, Stanley. Doesn't matter. He hears everything that goes on in here. If we can't trust him, there's no point trusting each other. Can't you just program him so that we can trust him? Demanded Davina. He's a complicated dog, Davina, replied Stanley in a tone of real shock. Come on, Bennett, he said. Come on, boy. Bennett leapt out of the shoe drawer and onto a chair. Will could tell, just by the look on Bennett's face, what the dog was going to try next. If he licks my face, Stanley, I swear that's the last time he's going to lick anybody. I'm telling you. Bennett, said Stanley in a low voice. Bennett gave a soft growl. Then he jumped onto Stanley's bed. Stanley lifted him up with one arm, still holding his other arm out towards Will and Davina. Bennett put out a paw until it was touching their fists. "We swear," whispered Davina solemnly, "that whatever happens, we will never betray each other." She looked at each of the others in turn. "Absolute trust." "Absolute trust," whispered Will. "Absolute trust," whispered Stanley. "Ruff!" said Bennett. Thanks for joining us. Tune in tomorrow for another chapter of Will Buster and the Gelmet Helmet.